Well, welcome. I'm Martin.
I'm Becky.
And the purpose of this video is really to talk about some of the resources that we've been using, putting together this series, The Sex Talk for Adults.
Yeah.
And we've got some various books here, which we'll just go through in a moment. And also, we'll give some podcasts that I've been listening to. I prefer to listen to stuff than read. Do you prefer to read or listen?
I'd have to say both. It depends. I love having a long form podcast to listen to in the car, but I do enjoy getting into a book. But I guess we just thought that actually this series, we can only go so far, can't we?
Yes.
Through Sundays.
Yeah.
So actually we want to help you to find some resources where you can dig into this yourself, because this is going to raise some questions as well.
Yeah, hopefully it'll whet your appetite to find out more around sexuality, gender, sex. It's a huge, huge subject, and people are coming at it from different directions. So if we can give you just some starting points, but even then, this is just a fairly focused group of books. So if you do have any particular resources you think are helpful, maybe you want to put in the comments below and just share what those are and what's maybe helped you in this subject. So shall I start?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah.
I'm excited to see.
The book I'm starting with has got nothing to do with sexuality, but I think it's a really foundational book with regard to looking at the church in relation to the world. And it's this book here by John Mark Comer called Live No Lies, and it's a really readable book. Have you read this?
I have not, but I've listened to the podcast.
You listened to the podcast, and that's the key thing, is that it comes with a podcast where John Mark Comer interviews some of the people he mentions in his book and goes into a little bit more detail. And there's one particular podcast with a lady called Dr. Nancy Pearcy, and the title of the podcast is On Loving Your Body, Human Rights and Secularism's Low View of Sexuality and Gender. I listened to that, thought, wow, this is really amazing. So I bought her book. Not a lot good me showing you that. I left the dust cover at home, but it's called Love Thy Body by Dr. Nancy Pearcy. And what it does is just gives you some foundations of how the world understands humanity, and then what she does is she goes off into different chapters and talks about abortion, euthanasia, gender, sexuality, all sorts of topics, using that worldview and applying it to those different subjects. So that's a really good book to listen to. Well, good podcast to listen to as an introduction. She goes through the whole book in the podcast with John Mark Comer. But yeah, you might want to buy the book as well. What have you got? Because I've got loads of books.
I have got these two matching books, Girls and Sex and Boys and Sex. Now, these are, they're not from a certain faith perspective or anything like that. They're by a lady called Peggy Orenstein. I'll show this camera as well. And she has basically interviewed and brought out lots of stories of teenage boys and teenage girls as they navigate their bodies, sex, pornography, all sorts of things that teenagers in our modern world are trying to wrestle through. And she does address these complex issues by telling real life stories and by talking to real life young boys and girls as they navigate these complex issues. So the subtitle of the Boys and Sex one, which is the one I'm reading next, which I'm very excited to dig into, is Young Men on Hookups, Love, Porn, Consent and Navigating the New Masculinity.
The new masculinity.
And apparently, especially if you have teenagers and are raising teenagers, these are absolute must-reads. So there you go.
Excellent. Now I've got another book here which is aimed at teenagers. So if you're a parent and you want to help teenagers with it, there's we've got 3 books here called, by a great name, Preston Sprinkle.
That is a good name.
Is a good name. And I'll get to those 2 in a minute. But this one is Living in a Grey World, a Christian Teen's Guide to Understanding Homosexuality. So that's just a fairly lightweight, you can see the writing's quite big. See that? There we go. Which is always a good sign to me. And it's just full of some really useful ideas of understanding homosexuality and particularly for teens, where everything's a little bit mixed up. It's a good book there. He's also got another couple of books. People to be Loved, Why Homosexuality is Not Just an Issue. And that's something we want to get very much across. Is this is as Christians, sometimes we can be in the danger of seeing this as a theological issue to debate, rather than, as Preston Sprinkle puts it, people to be loved. So that's another book. And then one here, when he talks about transgender identity, the church, and what the Bible has to say, is Embodied. So that's his latest book, I believe. So that might be one that you're interested in. Once again, he does podcasts. A lot of these books, and these ones freaks as well, I heard about them through podcasts, through an interview that he gave. So it's a great way of finding these books.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Speaking of real life people and real life stories,
yeah.
I want to recommend to people that they go and look up a woman called Jackie Hill Perry. She's a great follow on Instagram. She's also written a book called Gay Girl Good God. And there are loads of messages and talks that she's done on YouTube. It's a really inspiring read about a redemptive story of her giving her whole life over to Christ, and where he's taken her, where God has taken her since she did that, and how she thinks about her sexuality as a result. So she's quite a controversial figure. She's a really interesting person to dig into, and an amazingly inspiring woman of faith. So
yeah, great. Another story's a really good way into this. I'm realising, as Preston Sprinkle says it, these are people to be loved. And this is a book, you can see I'm just over halfway through it, book called A War of Loves by a guy called David Bennett. You can find him on Instagram if you want to see what he looks like. And this is his conversion story of being a gay activist, very anti-church, to actually becoming a gay celibate Christian. And he talks about his story. It's a very open and honest account of his search for love, really, which he ultimately found in Jesus. So it's A War of Loves, an unexpected story of a gay activist discovering Jesus by David Bennett. Another book, or two books, by a gay Christian is a guy called Ed Shaw. Ed Shaw is the pastor of Emmanuel City Centre in Bristol. Oh, by the way, David Bennett is Australian, but he lives in the UK. Ed Shaw is British, is English pastor, and he talks about two different things here. This is his earlier book, is The Plausibility Problem, the Church and Same-Sex Attraction. This is more about the churches, whether the way church has made it difficult for people with same-sex attraction. So that's a really interesting book. And this one, look, nice and short, ideal, perfect.
Excellent.
Big writing, it's great. And this talks about what is the purpose of our sexuality. That it's possible for our sexuality to be an important part of us, even if we aren't actually engaging in sexual relationships. It's part of our God's design, regardless of whether we're straight or gay or whatever way we describe ourselves. So
sounds really interesting.
yeah, so that's Ed Shaw.
We've got another Diddy one here.
Oh yeah, I like my Diddy books. So these are just little books which just pick up on some of the questions we ask. This one is by Sam Alberry, who's quite a well-known British guy around this subject. Is God anti-gay? And other questions about homosexuality, the Bible, and same-sex attraction. So a very little book there, but picks up on some of those key biblical texts that are often used in the argument for or against homosexuality. And then this one by a guy called Vaughn Roberts, and that's around the transgender issue as well. And Vaughn Roberts is the author and speaker and the rector of St Ebb's Church in Oxford. So we've got some British guys there. And then there's this book here. I would say this is a little bit more traditional, a little bit more old school, which you'd expect from John Stott. He's no longer with us, but he's very, very well known as a Christian leader and Anglican clergyman. So he's talking about same-sex relationships, and once again picking up on some of those biblical arguments around that as well.
Wow, is that enough to be going on with?
There is a couple of things.
Go on.
So loads of books, but if like me you prefer to listen rather than read, and maybe if you want to go a long commute, that would be ideal for you, or for me it's walking the dogs. There's a church called the Church of the City, New York, and I can't remember who the minister is there, but he's a really, really intellectual guy, an Australian who's living in New York. And they've got a whole section on their church website on sexual formation. And if you want some long sermons, I think the longest is 1 hour and 3/4. Don't worry, our sermons are about 20 to 30 minutes. and you just want to really delve into some of the details around these passages, then go to Church of the City of New York, Sexual Formation. We'll put the link in the bit below this video, and you can find out loads of stuff on there. Ed Shaw, who we're on here, he did an interview on the Speak Life podcast on what is sex for, purposeful sexuality, an interview with Ed Shaw. So that might be a good introduction to the book, and see if it's something you'll be interested in listening to as well. And then something a little bit more, a lot more controversial. The BBC did a really interesting look at Stonewall, which is a group that are there to push gay and transgender rights, and it's called Nolan Investigates Stonewall. So that's a really just interesting, though somewhat controversial podcast. But it's a BBC. It's not a Christian thing at all. It's just really interesting to look at.
We were talking a minute ago about how all of this that we're doing in this series, we want to go at it through the lens of Jesus and what he was like with people. So whilst people are diving into all of this, it's a great time to, if you've never read the Gospels before, or if you haven't read the Gospels in a while, also read them and refresh your memory and refresh your knowledge of the stories of how Jesus interacted with people and how he dealt with people who people didn't expect him to spend time with.
That is such a key, important point, because we can tie ourselves in knots with the arguments for and against, but actually the lens that we're looking at this all is the lens of Jesus and the way he treated people.
Awesome.
So enjoy, see how you get on, and do let us know if you've read any of these books, or like I said at the beginning, if there's any resources you found particularly helpful, then do just drop them in the comments below.
Yes, if you've got any questions about anything we've just talked about, anything in one of these books, you can email gotquestions@hawleybaptist.org.uk. We'll get back in touch with you and let's have a chat.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks,
Cheers.
Martin.
Bye.